I sat down the other day with Dave Beck from Paverson Games for a chat about his game Distilled, his design process, and what's coming next for his company. Unfortunately, the audio at the very beginning of that interview was corrupted, and despite my best efforts, I wasn't able to repair it enough to be audible. Fortunately, 90% of the interview was fine. Out of respect to Dave for being so generous and taking time out of his day to answer my questions, I still wanted to post this up for folks. But I did want to explain why the beginning of this interview might look a little strange. We'll be cutting into it in the middle of Dave answering the first question that I asked him, which was just about his own history with board games. He had started by explaining that as a kid he had a typical history of playing, Monopoly and things like that, but didn't really get into hobby games until later in life. You'll hear him talk about that in his own words in a second. Like I said, I just wanted to quickly explain why the beginning of this might look a little bit odd, but hopefully the rest of it will be useful and entertaining. So thanks, enjoy.
I still have it. One of my original games was Clue Master, the Great Museum Caper, and it was a Clue game that essentially is this giant box, and it came with a 3D um, uh, board that was supposed to represent a museum, and you were trying, essentially, kind of like Scotland Yard. You were trying to capture the thief that was trying to steal all the paintings. But my point being that there was something about these certain games that spoke to me that weren't, I did not really like playing Monopoly or Sorry, or and I really enjoyed these other games, but I didn't realize that there was a world out there of lots of these types of games. So then I go off to college, high school, play video games, college, playing video games. I'm an artist, or my background's in art. So I was doing a lot with sculpture, but I was not aware of any sort of games. I was not doing D&D, anything. Just video games, really. It was about it. And then I fast forward to around 2012. I'm actually hired to run. I'm doing video game design, and mainly the art for video games is kind of like a career. And I'm hired to start a new program at my university around video games. And my wife gets me a board game, gets me Dominion, and
Mm.
says, I went to I was trying to find something that, well, I thought you would like. I went to the store, friendly local game store, and I asked them what they would recommend. And it was this, and I looked at it like, okay, and I didn't want to be mean, but I was like, this is a board game. I'm not going to play this. Like, what? This is ridiculous. Um, but then I think, well, I'll get a couple guys together and we'll play. And it was just like this, my mind opened up, like, what? This stuff like this exists. And then I was just starting to fall down the hole. So that is kind of my history with board games. Dominion, of course, I talked about some of my when I was a kid, but then I really became really interested in Dominion. I fell in love with Netrunner as well. So it was like card-based games, a lot of the first ones I was playing, but then that expanded as well. So yeah, that was really what did it, and then that essentially is what caused me to become so interested in the hobby, to build a big collection, play games all the time with friends. But then, and I can talk about this if you want to, but I really, just like I stumbled into board games as a hobby playing them, I stumbled into design as well. I was a board game design as well. So it's been kind of one stumble after the next for me as far as my career goes, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds very familiar. My wife and I were similar. I had always known that this hobby kind of existed out there,
Uh-huh.
but had never really played a hobby board game. And one day for my birthday, I was like, we're just going to go to the game store and just grab something off the shelf.
Yeah.
Had no idea what we were getting. Happened to pick up Spirit Island. Um,
Oh, baby. You
yeah,
went in deep. You went to the
yeah,
deep end.
right off the bat, yeah. But yeah, got
Oh,
got
that's
hooked
cool.
got hooked on that after stumbling for a while and never looked back. That does lead me to my next question though. You mentioned you stumbled into designing as well. So how did you go from playing games to deciding you wanted to design them?
Yeah. So. I was, as I had mentioned, I was, and still, I'm at the same university. At a university, I was running the game design program. I was teaching mainly 3D modeling animation classes, but also obviously lots of with game design, video game design. I was making video games of my own as well, computer games, kind of artful games, using my interest in 3D modeling animation specifically. Um, but again, on the side, I was playing board games with friends on the weekends, and um, I was lucky enough to have a sabbatical, which is essentially at a university. You usually get 6 months, maybe more, but for me, 6 months to be able to pursue your own research. So for me, I had proposed that I would like to create some sort of virtual reality or augmented reality experience around history, and specifically Scotland. So I was going to my wife was actually already going to be teaching over there for the semester, so I proposed that I would go over there with her, and I would conduct this research and kind of create this essentially, like I said, virtual experience around the history there, around the artifacts, the sites. And I did do that. So I went over there. I actually checked an extra bag to just to carry games over there, board games, and I was playing games with some of the students there that were taking the program. And then on my own, I was conducting this research, and I was also, of course, touring distilleries over there because that's kind of it's kind of like down in Kentucky, I'd say, where the number one, well, it is the number one tourist industry in Scotland. In fact, one of the top industries in Scotland is whiskey. So tourism's number
Hmm.
one, and I think Scotland distilleries, whiskey is number two, I think, and maybe wool export is number three. Anyway, I was touring distilleries. I've always been a fan of whiskey. Nothing like I knew a lot, but I enjoyed it. And so I was touring distilleries. I was playing board games, and again, no joke, just as a stumble, I couldn't get to sleep one night. It was probably midnight. And I all of a sudden, out of nowhere, in my head, light bulb moment, popped this concept for how I could create a board game, a card game, around the distillation process. And what's funny about that is just like when my wife bought me the board game for the first time, she had been saying maybe for the past 6 months, I think you're going to make a board game. I was like, no, I have no idea how to make a board game. I have no interest in that. I do video games. We're good. I like to play board games. That's it. And then, lo and behold, I come up with that idea, um, which is like the central mechanic in the game, where you're kind of representing the distillation process by taking certain parts out of it. And I was up the rest of the night in the other room, furiously writing down notes about this game. And then I started the next day prototyping it out and play testing it myself. So it really was one of those moments where I, again, kind of fell into it. I was not looking for it. It kind of merged some of my passions together without me realizing it, and then kind of catapulted me in that direction.
And that just struck out of the blue, basically.
Truly out of the blue. I'd been playing, I think if I remember right, that night. So usually, I mean, long story short, we're in this giant house. It's almost like a castle, uh, in Scotland. And I once a week I would organize a game night with the students because again I wasn't teaching, but the students were there, and so I just thought it'd be fun to organize a game night. So I'd bring down a bunch of games, and usually I would just be because over there I could drink in front of these students because drinking age is 18. So I'm having a little bit of whiskey, nothing much, just like we'd have just a drink anytime. Uh, and so I'm drinking some whiskey. I think I was playing San Juan. I think I brought San Juan that night. Um, and I'm convinced that there's something about like some of the because there's even actually one could draw some ties between San Juan and Distilled, and I think it was because of that, because of me playing San Juan, because of me having just toured lots of different distilleries, that something in my brain fired off that night. All it was truly was, oh, deck building game, because at that time it was a deck building game where I take the bottom and the top card representing the heads and the tails of the spirit. And that was it. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, I could be running a distillery and I have to buy the ingredients and then I have to sell them. And so my mind started going. And yeah, that's where it came from.
Wow. And for those that don't know, if you haven't played Distilled, I personally think that is the most brilliant mechanic in it. You take all these ingredients, you shuffle them together, and then you take the angel share and the devil share, the top and the bottom card,
Yep, yep.
and you hope and pray that those aren't the ingredients that you need to make whatever sort of spirit you're trying to make, which really brilliantly adds, I think, that little bit of tension to every
Yep.
single distilling phase. Yeah, I think it's not only a really clever mechanic, it's so thematic. It's that thing every designer aims for, but few ever hit as
Yeah.
square on as you hit with that.
Yeah.
I mean, congratulations, I guess is what I'm trying to get at there.
Thank you. Yeah, that what you were saying, devil's angel share, devil's cut. It's the usually people call them the heads and the tails, because the heart is what you want to keep, and that stuff's toxic, but they reuse it. And so that's what it got into my mind. Like, well, wait a minute, I get because it wouldn't be great if you just pulled it off and threw it out. But since distillers actually pull it off and reuse it, I thought, well, that would work because then, yeah, you didn't get it that time, but then you could get it the next time. So yeah, and then with the angel share, that's kind of what comes out of the cask as it's aging. And actually, the game's gone through many iterations. And originally, I had you pulling cards randomly off as it aged too, but that was too brutal because players had worked so hard to make this great whiskey, and then they were losing all their stuff out of it. So
Yeah. So another thing that I really noticed when playing Distilled, you clearly put a lot of thought into representation.
Mhm.
It's a common problem in this industry. Honestly, you see a sea of white male
Yep.
faces typically.
Yep.
I have to imagine, given the level of diversity that is in both the base game of Distilled, but then I think it really even becomes more clear with the expansions.
Mhm. Mhm.
It seems clear to me that you put a lot of thought and intentionality behind that. Could you speak about that and why that was important?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a great question, great observation, and you were exactly right. I actually, again, kind of looking back to the history of it, originally when I came up with the idea for the game, it was just going to be about making whiskey, nothing else, just whiskey. And because I thought the center of the universe is whiskey, and that's what everybody drinks, and that's the most possible drink. Da, da, da. But I started doing research and very quickly discovered no, this is not the case at all. There's these drinks like over in China called baijiu, or in Korea called soju, that are more consumed per capita or per ounce or whatever you want to say on the planet than whiskey ever could. And that was when that moment kind of caused me to pause to realize, wait a minute. I shouldn't make this about whiskey. That's a very I mean, it's not entirely true, but it's a fairly westernized drink. And if I truly wanted to represent distillation, why wouldn't I just represent spirits from all around the world? And then, if I truly want to represent these spirits from all around the world, I probably should have people representative of those locations that would be the ones that would be associated with distilling it or running that distillery. And then we went even further in thinking that, well, also we're going to hire people into this distillery. One part of the game, you can hire different specialists to essentially kind of install, if you will, onto your board, and they're going to give you extra powers. And so we thought this is another opportunity for us to really kind of push the bounds of kind of more modern distillation, or modern thought on kind of a diverse group of people. So yeah, we really leaned hard into that. We knew with the distillers themselves, the idea was you were inheriting this from someone in the past, and so we could. That means the past as in yesterday or 1,000 years ago. So we really kind of stretched that as far as we could, knowing that we could play with lots of different kind of time periods and eras there too. But I do want to. This would not be fully the truth without talking about two other things. One, Eric Evanson was the artist and graphic designer for this. He's a friend of mine, and he really is the one to thank and to kind of give credit for really kind of incorporating such a kind of a wide array, a rainbow, if you will, of different people, cultures, backgrounds. He really thought about that, and although we always had that intention with the distillers, he really pushed it even further with some of those specialists, which was great. And then we also knew though that if we were going to do this, we would need to hire some people that had some expertise in this area too. So I actually hired a cultural consultant for the game as well. That really looked over each mini biography we wrote, as well as imagery, to make sure that we were being sensitive and inclusive as best as we could for each individual and each culture. So,
That's great.
yeah.
Well, and speaking of that, another thing, reading through the instruction booklet for the first time, I don't know if this is something you picked up on as you were doing research for the game, or if you just talked to a lot of experts, but you clearly lay out mechanic versus the actual science,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
throughout the instruction book. It's frankly educational, really, like especially if you don't know how the distillation process works. By the time you read that instruction book, you have a decent idea.
Yeah, yeah. That was the concept. So I had toured enough distilleries, and then obviously did quite a lot of research myself. I read tons of books. I don't think they're down here now, but I had a stack of books about distillation, about baijiu, whiskey, soju, cachaça, like all the different spirits and their backgrounds, their history as well. And yeah, so that was a very important part of it. I'm with my company as well as just as a designer, probably because of my background in art, but also I double majored in history too. I really want to, and as a professor, I really want to make sure people kind of understand the purpose behind the design. And hopefully, maybe like you just said, are educated a little bit too. So that was intentional, and that's also why we didn't have to, but we added a couple extra pages in the back that talked a little bit about each spirit to educate people about that too. Well, I just think it's really important that I don't want people to feel like they're sitting in a school lesson, but I do think that it's easier for someone to learn something if they understand that there's like a connection between how that really works or how they can think about it outside of the game space, um, outside of what's happening at the table. And so I found that that works really well.
Okay. Um, the game has really, really nice components. Did you partner with Game Trays? I can't remember.
Yes, I
Yeah,
did.
okay, yeah, that's what I thought. And you really went for the sort of deluxe experience over price consciousness, I guess. I mean, the game's not ridiculously expensive or anything, but it is a really nice package with really nice components in it.
Mhm.
And it seems like that's kind of a guiding principle for you. Um, how did you sort of come to that philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeremy. I think that part of it was with Distilled. I always kind of joke about it in this way too, with a pun, but I really seek out and I want to be able to create a top shelf experience, kind of like a nice whiskey. I want people to have something that's out on their table that is not just a fun game to play, but also something fun, interesting to look at, or to hold, or to interact with. I think that overall experience is very, very important. So that's why I chose to do that. I will say with Distilled, it was interesting too, because since it was kind of our first big game, I didn't want to create multiple versions. I didn't want to create a retail version and a deluxe version. I wanted to create something that was felt deluxe, not to the point where there's like metal coins in the box, but felt deluxe, to the point where when someone opened it up, they're like, oh, like there's a feeling when you open that up. I wanted that too. So yeah, it's something that is part of our mission, to be able to create what I like to call exquisite experiences, so that you are able to look at objects or see little touches that we add to the game that quite frankly aren't necessary. Like certain things are not necessary, but and we're doing that with our future games too. But they make that game all the better because of it, or that experience, I should say, all the better because of it.
Okay. Um, what's on your table? What's your favorite thing to get out and play right now?
Not a
Well,
tape
yes.
measure, apparently. Um, It's funny. There's been a lot of prototypes on my table where I'm evaluating, looking at other games. But otherwise, I would say I'm actually playing through um, the campaign of Star Wars Imperial Assault with my son now,
Hmm.
and then and a friend of mine and his son. So that's one thing. I love that kind of thematic experience of that game. So that's one. I also recently played again, kind of thinking about playing with my son. I played uh, War of the Ring with him. Introduced that as or not War of the Ring with someone else, and then I introduced Star Wars Rebellion to him. So those like epic big experiences are something that I've always really loved. But I will say, sadly, lately, probably just because of all the busyness of life and everything else, I haven't gotten to play it nearly as much. I haven't gotten together with friends to play, so it's kind of sad. I need to. I'm looking forward to summer because I think once we're through the school year, I'll have some more time for sure.
I know that feeling. um, where can people go to if they want to get a copy of Distilled, and where can they go to find out more about what you're working on now?
Yeah, so they can go to paversongames.com if they want to purchase Distilled or anything else that's part of Distilled as far as deluxe add-ons. So what like metal coins, play mats, those are probably the two most popular ones. But lots of and expansions too. So that's all on there and actually only there. Uh, you can find Distilled at hopefully at your friendly local game store. We're already in our second print run and we're starting to already dwindle down. So it's exciting, but it's also like, I guess I should have printed more. So that's where you can find that. Um, you can also find it. I will be at three conventions this year. I'm going to be at for sure, and I might be at more. I'm going to be over across the pond at UK Games Expo this year. I'm
Hmm.
also going to be at Gen Con again, and I am going to try Essen. I'm gonna for the first time. I'm going to try going to Essen as well. So
Oh, the big show.
yeah, trying the big show. So those three for sure. I might go to Origins. I don't have a booth, but I might still try and go to Origins. And then what I'm working on is actually connected to some of that, as far as why I'm going to some shows and not others. Is really excited about our next game we're coming out with called Luthier, Luthier. And it's essentially about crafting musical instruments in the golden age of classical music. Um, a little heavier, slightly heavier than Distilled. The artwork is all by Vincent Dutrait, so really excited about some of the beautiful instruments and people that he's been painting. It's all historically accurate. So again, just like Distilled, lots of research went into this. And we've got
Awesome.
about 40 different characters that are all kind of real people, did real things with music. Um, it's a hidden bidding worker placement game with a big sprawling board, so it's a pretty big table hog. But I'm really excited about it, and it's something that has I'm co-designing with someone else. They had been working on it for years, and then I kind of took it over and somewhat redesigned it over the last couple of years, and now we're going to be releasing it. We're going to launch it on Kickstarter on July 16th. So you'll be able to find it on Kickstarter and follow along there if you so choose, if you're interested in that theme or in more stuff by Paperson Games.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much, Dave. I really appreciate this.
No problem. This is fun, Jeremy.